What is up, everybody? Welcome to another edition of the Weekend Roundup here on Touchline Talk. Thank you so much for tuning in. As always, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the videos going up on the Touchline Talk channel. U.S. men's national team, Copa America tune-up number 1 is a 5-1 defeat to Colombia. That's where I'm going to start today, and then I have a couple NWSL things I want to talk about very briefly. There's obviously a lot of strong reaction to this result. Lots of Berhalter out kind of stuff you're seeing on social media. And this is where the actual way the game played out really matters. Because there is a significant and important difference between being outmatched and not playing well. Being outmatched is you don't look like you belong on the field with that team. Not playing well is what happened in this game, where Jedi Robinson makes an unnecessary play on the ball where he could have just let it go out, and that leads to a goal. Don't take care of business on the set piece, and then basically concede the same goal 3 times in 15 minutes or whatever it was. I think it was a little bit less than that, by turning the ball over while trying to play out of the back and trying to build going forward. Those are things that can be addressed, which to me makes this much less concerning than if the U.S. had just been played off the field, because it was a pretty balanced game. The scoreline does not indicate what you were actually watching, other than all of the decisive moments that went Colombia's way, because you can't make those kind of mistakes against a team of Colombia's caliber, which is the big question for this U.S. team, right? Is what do they look like when they're playing against really high-level opposition, because there's just nobody in CONCACAF to really challenge them right now. Maybe Canada a little bit, but that's about it. Mexico's been one-sided. That's why these tune-up games are important. That's why Copa America is so important, because you don't get many of these. And the U.S. was awful because of the moments where they made mistakes. But it wasn't a talent disparity thing, which is much harder to fix. And I would rather have this be players, generally speaking, who you feel good about and trust. Jedi Robinson comes to mind immediately. Somebody who didn't have a great game, but was a top 5 to 8 left back in the Premier League this season. I'd much rather have that than there is no creativity, there are no ideas, they can't score goals. That's a lot more of the criticism this team typically gets. That's much more concerning. There were some chances in this game. They scored a good goal, had a really good stretch of 20 to 30 minutes there in the second half, got back into the game, certainly looked like they had a good chance to tie it. And then you give the ball away 3 times and Colombia punishes you 3 times because Colombia is a very good team. So that's the first part of this to look at, is the sky is not falling to me. It's one game with some awful, uncharacteristic mistakes. And trying to project that forward just isn't a good idea, because who knows what looks like against Brazil. And to further emphasize that point, go look at what has happened to the other CONCACAF teams. Mexico and Canada both also lost by 4. And then Canada got a draw against France, and Mexico hung in there with Brazil. Days later. You just can't put too much stock into one friendly result. You can't do it. Now, the concerning part of this for me is, number one, if it happens again against Brazil, this is becoming a trend that obviously needs to stop. But number two, if you look, my big thing coming out of the World Cup was they showed up against England, against Wales, against Iran. Outside of a couple bad moments, were good against the Netherlands. Again, another game where, It's kind of decided on a couple bad moments, but there were some really good performances that made you feel like they belong on this level and that all the hype was justified. That was the biggest positive thing you could say to me about Greg Berhalter in the conversation of whether he should keep the job or not. You look at what's happened since then. Germany game wasn't great. Okay, the Ghana win was good, but Ghana is not exactly elite opposition. And now this. In the few opportunities the U.S. has had to really make a statement since the World Cup, because they made one at the World Cup, they have not taken advantage. You've got Brazil, then you've got Copa America, Uruguay in your group, potentially a rematch with Colombia, or a rematch with Brazil in the quarterfinals if the U.S. gets that far. This is the first time that they started a entirely European-based lineup. That matters. It's not that this team isn't good enough from a player-by-player standpoint. It's an execution question, which is an important question that obviously if they don't play better and continue to have these issues in big games, it doesn't matter what clubs they're playing for and how talented these players are. Because those few moments decide games. That's the difference between going home in a round of 16 and getting to a semifinal, or surviving that one game you need in the group stage, or surviving that one game you need in the knockout stage where then things go your way the next round, whatever it might be. The margins are that slim at the highest level, and that's what this team is learning. I do think there was some naivety of just not taking this as seriously as they should, and they paid for it. They got embarrassed. I just don't think it's the end of the world. Let's see what happens against Brazil. Let's see what happens in Copa America. If this is becoming a thing, then you gotta, as much as I don't want to put individual errors on a coach, you do have to start asking some real questions about whether Berhalter can keep this job if Copa America is a disaster. But we are so far from that. Let's at least give this team a second game, see what they learned, see what they look like against Brazil. Have this tendency to just jump to conclusions and change all the narratives after every single game. It's one of my least favorite things in sports. It's just no reason to freak out about one performance that was about individual mistakes, not a horrible, no idea what they were doing on the field. You just had some players in some unfamiliar positions, a la Johnny Cardoso, Joe Scally to a certain extent, and some players who just made some uncharacteristic mistakes. Can ask questions about maybe the lineup needs to change a little bit, but it's a bad game. It's a really bad game. And it's a game that ultimately doesn't matter from a larger significance standpoint. As long as it is an isolated incident and you're not talking about this moving forward. You've seen this before. England just lost to Iceland. Nobody's going to remember that if England goes and wins the Euros. It's the same deal here. If the U.S. makes the semifinals, makes a really good run at Copa America, nobody's going to remember this. But if they get walloped by Brazil, keep giving the ball away, and just can't do anything productive with it, and then don't get out of the group of Copa America, okay, now you're having a completely different conversation. But we're not there yet. So let's give this team the opportunity to learn from this game and see where things are at in a couple weeks, in a month when Copa America is over. A couple NWSL things I want to mention really quickly. Orlando Pride have been on quite the roll. 8 straight wins. The winning streak did come to an end. San Diego Wave managed to get a draw after a very, very good opening goal from the Pride. Unbeaten run is still going because they did come away with that point, but the historic winning streak comes to an end. This is a really good story I want to dive into more over the summer, just with the ends of the European seasons and now, group squads for these tournaments being announced and the U.S. women playing and the U.S. men playing. There hasn't been too much time to get into the specifics of NWSL, but this is an incredible, incredible story that's emerging with Seb Hines' team in Orlando. Second thing, Sophia Smith sent off at the very end of the Portland Thorns game for one of the more bizarre second yellow cards you're going to see. You can go watch the video. She hid the ball, moved the ball further out of play while sitting on the bench, buried it underneath the bench to prevent play from continuing. Yeah, it's kind of funny and amusing. And also, there is a larger significance here. That is why this can't just be laughed off as what in the world was Sophia Smith doing? She is wild for this. Maybe not so much time wasting because I put diving into this conversation too, but both of them. We'll call it dark arts in general because that's what this was. I feel like it is one of the biggest complaints about this sport is all the diving, the flopping, the embellishing. Again, maybe not so much the time wasting, but to a certain extent that too. And I feel like there is a collective agreement that we want this out of the game. Maybe not unanimous, but generally that there's an acknowledgement that it would be better if this stopped, or at least was less common. If that is the case, the only way to actually make it happen is to hold everybody accountable and to have real consequences for it. There should be more yellow cards for diving. There should be more yellow cards for time wasting. I don't care that it was Sophia Smith and that Sophia Smith seems to be a wonderful human being and you don't hear anything bad about her. You don't hear anything bad about her. I don't care that she's the face of the NWSL. She was on a yellow card and she intentionally delayed the game. That is a second yellow. And now, because it kind of went viral and because it's Sophia Smith and it's a big deal, maybe next time the player who has this idea won't do it because even Sophia Smith got punished for it. This idea that somehow the referee went too far to me is ridiculous. Unless you just don't care about this stuff. If you're okay with this stuff, then sure, we don't need to be sending Sophia Smith off for it if it's not a big deal. But if you let one person pass, you are incentivizing this kind of behavior because somebody else is going to look at it and go, oh, it worked for him, worked for her. I'm going to do it too. It's the same thing when you have to fall down in order to get a call. It's incentivizing diving because if you don't go down, you don't get the call. If you reward players for staying up, they're more likely to stay up. So again, this is a bigger conversation. It doesn't just have to do with time wasting, but that was as blatant as you are probably ever going to see. I can only think of one other instance, and that was Henry Kessler of the New England Revolution, who I think one of the balls on the stand that was waiting to be put into play, he ran over and threw it into the crowd or knocked it or something. He essentially took it out of play so that the opposing player couldn't grab it. That's the only thing I can kind of think of that's comparable to this. So good for the referee. It's funny. It's amusing. It's not a huge deal at the end of the day in terms of the larger picture of the world, the NWSL or anything like that. Sophia Smith's going to be just fine. But if you want to clean this stuff up and you don't want players doing that and you don't want players diving and you don't want players wasting a bunch of time, start handing out yellow cards. Start handing out second yellow cards when the situation warrants it, and put the time back on the clock so that this doesn't actually benefit you in any way. It's all about what you are incentivizing. Do you want to incentivize dark arts, or do you want to incentivize trying to actually play the game and cleaning all of this stuff up? I am very much about cleaning this stuff up and trying to get it out, which means even Sophia Smith needs to be held accountable when she does something like that. That is all for this week's edition of the Weekend Roundup. Thank you so much for tuning in. As always, be sure to hit that subscribe button, and I will see you next time.